welcome to my couch. I guess I'm Sarah Z now. So I was looking around for a video idea and I came across this fact that I've seen in books and on the internet my entire life, which is that the planet Saturn would float in a glass of water. Except as far as I can tell, no one's tried it. So I thought, well, that's some great content, isn't it? I've already got a glass of water, let's do this. Okay, so I ordered this planet online earlier and it's come back and said there's a delivery charge. Well, yeah, I mean, I know that, but the weight, 600 trillion gigatons. I mean, yeah, I know that's a lot. Delivery, yeah, 800 million miles. But, I mean, yes, I appreciate that, but it said on the website that delivery was free if you spent more than £20. Yeah, okay, you know what? Fine, I don't care. I don't want some yodel driver just hurling gas giants vaguely towards my flat anyway. Goodbye. Gonna try DHL.
Okay, so I just need the dimensions of a package now and we can work out its volumetric weight.
Volumetric weight? What is that, like how much space it weighs?
No, it's more like how much weight it takes up.
Okay, fine. Okay, so it'll be like a cubic package of side length about 75,000 miles. Hang on a sec. I'm gonna have to call you back. Do I have to explain to NASA that this is small but Saturn is far away? Well, it looks like we're doing a thought experiment after all. We either have to pretend that Saturn is really small or that this glass is really big. And the problem with making Saturn small is that it's only held together by its own gravity. If we make it small enough to fit in the glass, it's just going to dissolve into the air. We're going to have to put Saturn in something, and I don't think YouTube is going to allow me to upload a video of a half-inflated condom bobbing around in the sink, so I've got these plastic gas-containing Saturn shapes. Ping pong balls. Let's do this. Gonna be honest, I'm a little underwhelmed with this as a demo. I think we should make the glass big. So, suppose this glass is 90,000 miles across. The first thing to notice is that you are dead. If you're in Europe, you've been crushed, not so much under the weight of the glass of water crashing to Earth, but under the weight of the Earth crashing to glass of water, which is now the dominant gravitational mass in this part of space. And by, like, a lot. And we're the lucky ones. Buenos Aires is now on the side of the Earth, so they get to fall horizontally off the planet, trying to avoid all the trees and buildings as they go. The continent of Australia is now floating on a sea of lava, so they get to surf their way to oblivion, which is at least on brand. If there's a silver lining to all of this, it's that somewhere there's a tedious male executive explaining why we don't really need feminism, actually, when suddenly the gravity shifts and he flies up into the sky to be dashed to bits on a literal glass ceiling. And the next thing that happens, I think, is that the glass explodes. Because this is now entirely under its own gravity, and there's a lot of gravity. This water wants to be a sphere, and the glass is constraining it to be a cylinder. That creates enormous pressure around what is now the equator of the glass. And the question is, can the glass withstand that pressure? So I looked up an equation for the strength of a pipe, because I figure this is basically a pipe with a cap on the bottom. And it turns out that the pressure it can withstand is 2 times the yield strength of the material times the thickness of the wall divided by the outer diameter. And what that means is that scaling it up to the size of Saturn doesn't actually make it any stronger, because the yield strength of the material doesn't change, and the thickness divided by the diameter doesn't change either. So I don't know how much pressure this glass can withstand, but I'm willing to bet not an entire Saturn's worth of water trying to burst out of it. That said, I'm not certain about the burst pressure of this glass, because I think this equation came from engineering, and engineers have a habit of making what they think of as reasonable assumptions, like pipes are smaller than planets, or you haven't just magicked up 2 septillion tons of water, which really limits the usefulness of their work in my chosen field of applied bullshit. I mean, I wanted to do pure bullshit, but apparently the closest thing they offered was PPE. And, I know this is a bit pedantic because you aren't really supposed to think that Saturn would actually float in a real-life glass of water, but at the same time, the Senate chose not to convict, which means that there's a chance Donald Trump will be put in charge of the executive branch again, and the executive branch runs NASA. So if it's on NASA's children's website, that's what he's going to be reading. And he definitely hasn't seen the Father Ted bit about small and far away. I mean, I think if anything, he prefers Glinner's later work. So this isn't really a glass of water anymore at all. This is a sphere of water with bits of broken glass floating around in it. And it's actually got an atmosphere because the pressure is 0 in space, so the water's going to boil off at the surface and form vapour. And it's actually got a solid core, I mean, apart from all the bits of glass. Because usually ice is lighter than water. But most things in the universe, if you freeze them, the atoms get neatly lined up, it takes up less space and it's denser and it sinks. Whereas water works like the crap on my desk. For some reason, every time I try to neatly arrange it, it takes up more space than it did before. But it turns out that if you apply enough pressure to water, you can force it into one of these neat arrangements and you get another phase, even solider than ice. Because it turns out what we learned in school about ice, water and steam is not the whole story. If you apply enough pressure, you've got ice 2 and ice 3 and ice 4, these are the genuine names. It goes up to about ice 14, each one getting denser and denser and requiring greater and greater pressures to produce it. But a ball of water the size of the planet Saturn produces some pretty high pressures. So it's got a solid core and an atmosphere, and probably the water's starting to freeze at the surface, so it might even have land masses. This is a legitimate planet. It's a glass giant. Yeah, that's right, a proper joke. What are we, 10 minutes in? Saturn, at this point, does not care. It's maybe glancing across at the inner planets, thinking, that's a bit weird, there's this new ocean world that's moving around, eating them all up, but it's not really Saturn's problem at this point. Maybe Saturn is logging into Facebook and marking itself safe. I mean, the server's down because the world's been destroyed, but it's a nice thought. You don't want Mr. and Mrs. Saturn worrying. But they should worry, because the next step is to dunk their precious child in the water planet. And we're just going to have to dunk it as is, because they don't make condoms 120,000 kilometres across. So in it goes, but, carefully, because if we bring it in too slowly, it'll be torn apart by tidal forces before it gets near the surface, and our glass planet will end up with a beautiful set of rings. And if we just let it fall in, then the impact will be so energetic that concepts like sinking and floating won't really apply. The glass planet will survive, but I wouldn't be surprised if a section gets blown off and forms a moon. We're going to have to bring this in very carefully with some kind of science fiction tractor beam. And after all that, what happens when it finally gets lowered carefully to the surface of the glass giant planet? Well, nothing, because you can't dunk a gas in a liquid, can you? You know that. If you have a mug of coffee and you blow on it, you don't think, ooh, my breath floats. I mean, sure, it doesn't sink either, but we're well outside the usual definition of floating here. What are we saying, that Saturn floats if a tomato is a fruit? No, Saturn is just going to merge with the atmosphere of the planet. And if it has a rocky core, then that will sink. If you want to call that Saturn floating in a glass of water, then you go ahead, but for me, it doesn't really feel right.